Issues. We're joined by Rebecca Burdick, Policy Manager on Workforce Skills at the New South Wales Business Chamber of Commerce and Executive Director of the Australia Institute, Ben Oquist. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
So we are at that time of year where, as Joe just mentioned, obviously a lot of people working overtime, and in some cases they've had their penalty rates pulled back. Ben, is it working?
I don't think so. There's not much evidence of the economic case that penalty rate cuts were going to be good for employment or good for the economy. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that suggests it's worse, not just worse obviously for those people with less pay, but less pay means less money in people's pockets to buy things. Less money in people's pockets to buy things means aggregate demand is down, and it's bad for the economy overall, bad for the government. The Australia Institute had some figures out earlier this year, suggested potentially the penalty rate cut would result in a $650 million revenue shortfall. We have less taxes, people have less money in their pocket. So all the evidence suggests there's not much of an economic case for the cuts in penalty rates. Maybe it means employers shift people from weekdays to weekends, but overall people only can buy as much as they've got in their pockets, and they spread their purchasing power over the week. And then they've got less money in their pockets because they've been paid less via lower penalty rates, and that's not good for all of us.
Rebecca, is that the case? Are people tightening the purse strings because they're not being paid?
No, I wouldn't agree with that assertion at all. I think the number one issue that consumers report at the moment is rising energy costs. That's what consumers are really concerned about. That's what it is hitting their hip pocket. And I just want to restore a little bit of sense to the debate around penalty rates. So here's a few facts. Fact one, the changes are being phased in over 4 years. So we've only had a few months since they were first introduced. We don't really have enough time to assess whether they've delivered a bit of a boost in terms of jobs or not. Second fact, the changes were fairly minor, so they were moving Sunday penalty rates in line with Saturday penalty rates. We weren't seeing penalty rates being stripped away altogether. We were not seeing a massive hit to the hip pockets of workers. Thirdly, workers, on the very same day that the penalty rates changes started to be introduced on 1 July, received a 3.3% pay increase from the Fair Work Commission. So in fact, award workers this Christmas have more money in their wage packets than they would have before the penalty rate reforms were introduced. They're the facts.
I'm just looking at a survey conducted by the University of Wollongong and Quarry University that found essentially that there was no short-term increase in average weekly hours worked by employees as a result of these cuts to penalty rates. Was that not part of the intention, though?
Well, I think that study was performed with the McKell Institute, and I think they were after a cheap headline and they got it. That's what they were after. Our CEO said it best. I think he said perhaps they imbibed a little bit too much of the Christmas drinks, had a few drinkies and thought they'd go after a really cheap headline.
Okay, you're completely dismissing that then?
Completely dismissing it. We've had something like 4 months or 5 months since the changes were introduced. It's not long enough to be performing proper modelling and perform a proper assessment of whether the penalty rates changes delivered the changes, the positive benefits that business was expecting.
Ben?
I think overall the problem is that one of the scourges of society at the moment is rising inequality and record low wage growth. We've had a record low wage growth for a number of years now. Profits of a share of GDP are at all-time record high. Wages share of GDP is at all-time record low. We actually need a conversation about how to boost wages, not cut them. And that's why the penalty rate cut has come at completely the wrong time. And it's anathema to many people, but we're actually going to have to work out a way of a new kind of compact that allows workers to bargain for higher wages, because it's not just relating to inequality that's bad for individuals, but that inequality is generating some economic drag. OECD, the IMF, all talking about the fact that inequality is leading to lower growth for the economy overall, and that's bad for all of us. We need a new discussion about how to boost wages, not cut them.
All right, well, it's not just wages, obviously low wage growth there, but as we've seen in the United States, the government, Donald Trump, has succeeded in cutting corporate tax rates. Pressure now on Australia, because obviously the government here wants to do the same. Is it now imperative that the Australians follow suit?
It absolutely is. So there's a very strong signal being sent to the Senate now that they need to pass the next raft of corporate tax reforms. If the biggest economy in the world, has passed on a corporate tax cut, has made legislated a corporate tax cut, that sends a strong signal to Australia and other competing economies that we need to follow suit. We will be less globally competitive with the United States and other countries if we don't deliver a similar cut. I think there's also some facts that we need to get into this argument too, which is a cut to the company tax rate doesn't just benefit big business. So I think it's being couched at the moment as benefiting big business, benefiting those sort of big corporate fat cats. That's not the case. It will actually deliver benefits throughout the supply chain, and what that means is small to medium enterprises, which I represent, will stand to benefit because larger companies will choose to buy their products and services in Australia, and they in turn can create jobs. They in turn can give a young person in regional Australia their foot in the door in their first job.
Ben, particularly with the mid-year economic budget update release, there was a lot of talk about that exact thing, about that trickle-down approach, that if there was a corporate tax cut, then it would trickle down to affect wages. But is that always the case?
Well, that's not what the evidence suggests. Australia has cut company tax rates in the past. It hasn't led to some big increases in jobs and growth. In fact, the evidence that the Australia Institute looked at is around the world is if you look at company tax rates and GDP per capita or prosperity for the population overall, there is no correlation between company tax rates and that well-being. There is no correlation between company tax rates and growth. There is no correlation between company tax rates and employment. There is no correlation in Australia between high levels of company tax rate and foreign investment. And one of the arguments that's used a lot is that we need this cut to generate foreign investment. Australia doesn't have a foreign investment problem. We've never had a foreign investment problem.
So you're saying that argument that we will be too uncompetitive if we don't cut rates doesn't cut it?
It doesn't stack up. I mean, Donald Trump and his economic plan is economic vandalism. Cutting company tax rates in Australia, which would be a $15 billion gift per annum to big business in Australia, would be economic vandalism. We've got a revenue problem in Australia. We've got an inequality problem in Australia. We've got record low wage growth. We've got a third of big businesses in Australia, according to the ATO, not paying enough tax. We've got multinational tax avoidance around the world. Australia has a revenue problem. It would be economic vandalism to follow Donald Trump, of all people, and cut company taxes.
All right, Rebecca wants to respond to that.
Well, I guess one thing that I would say is, don't you accept... I'm not a tax expert, I'm not a tax policy analyst, but I respect the opinions of the people who are the experts in Treasury. So Treasury has passed down a briefing to the Treasurer stating that if we don't pass this next raft of corporate tax cuts, then our economy will suffer. And they've also quoted the IMF in that. So you quoted the IMF a moment ago around the issue of equality. Do you not respect the IMF's opinion around company tax cuts because they think that they're highly necessary in order to generate foreign investment?
I respect the 50 economists that the Australia Institute put together, headed by Bernie Fraser, the ex-head of the RBA, head of the Treasury, that said it's not a good choice. The reality is if you spend any amount of revenue or any expenditure, you'll get some economic effect. The actual choice is whether this is the best use of $65 billion over 10 years to stimulate the economy. And it's not. If you put that money into education, or if you put that money into reducing energy costs, all that will produce a much better economic dividend than a $65 billion handout to big business.
All right, well, all this talk of money, have we actually lost sight of where we're at? We're
Christmas
Eve. That's the question I want to put to both of you, actually.
Sure.
Do you think we've lost the faith?
Look, if we go by census data, then there are more and more Australians every year reporting the fact, or every few years, reporting the fact that they don't adhere to any particular religious faith. But I don't think that means that we can throw the baby out with the bathwater and say festivals like Christmas and Yom Kippur aren't really important. They're really, really important times for families to come together, to enjoy food. I'm very much a lapsed Catholic, but I know that I'll be joining my family for some seafood and barbecue tomorrow.
What about the religious aspect, though? Will you be going to church, and where does the church...
That's a very personal question. I think my mum is watching this. Look, I would go to Mass on a Christmas day, and I have to say whenever I do go to Mass on a Christmas day, it's the one time of year where I go, and I think every time I've been, the church has been very, very full. So I don't think that... There are still millions of Australians who adhere to a religious faith. There are still millions of religious Australians. While the secular community is growing, I don't think we can dismiss the importance of religious faith.
Well, Ben, you only have to look at the last census to see that perhaps we are losing our faith, that fewer and fewer Australians are attending church.
Well, I think it's true about the religious significance for Christmas for most people. I did a little check around the family yesterday, and the daughter and her cousins, and it was presents and spending time with friends and family was what Christmas was about for them. But it does serve as a kind of reflection point for many people, I think, and reflecting on some Christian values is important for many people, and they hold the test of time. Love thy neighbour as thyself. These are important things to reflect upon, and those morals teachings of the church, I think people do think about at Christmas, but I don't think they think about the kind of bigger religious questions, the meaning of life, the search for truth. And I think maybe that's the part of Christmas and religious teaching that is being lost.
Sorry, we simply don't have time to get into the Ben Oakrest, Rebecca Burdick. On that note, Merry Christmas. Thanks very much.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks for having us.